Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's joint astronomical colloquium in Heidelberg. And we have another very distinguished speaker today, Elena Pancino. And I will ask her host, Michaela Mappelli, to make the introduction.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Elena Pancino. Elena did a joint PhD at the University of Bologna and at ESO. And during her PhD, she started to fight with the ESO imaging survey. And the main challenge of it was to reconcile her attitude to produce perfect spectra and to analyze every single data point like her own baby, and the attitude of big data, large survey, crunch them all and forget about the details. But she managed to survive, so she became a spectroscopist and an expert of the globular classes Omega Centauri. And short after her PhD, or I should say immediately after you got the PhD in 2003, Elena became a permanent researcher at the National Center for Astrophysics in Italy, where she was first in Bologna and then she moved to Florence. Over the years, she's been a member of the Gaia collaboration. For the Gaia collaboration, she did a lot of work in data analysis, calibration of spectroscopic stars, right? And finally, about 1 year ago, 2023, Elena got an ERC advance grant, and she's gonna tell us more about it today. And the project is about globular clusters and the evolution of exotic objects in globular clusters. Elena, you have the stage.
So thank you, Michaela. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure. I love Heidelberg, and I always come here if I can. So invite me as much as you wish. So as Michaela said, I'm going to talk about the project StarDance. The project has not really started yet, so I will describe the logic behind it and the hypothesis that we want to test. And it's all about the non-canonical evolution of stars in clusters. Now, let me start by talking a little bit about clusters. They are one of the best laboratories we have to test our theories of stellar dynamics or dynamics in general, to test stellar evolution models and ideas on how stars form and evolve. And in fact, they are one of the very few calibrators we have available to calibrate our stellar evolution model, stellar structure, I would say, and evolution models. And this in turns transforms star clusters as in one of the best calibrators of the stellar age scale, which is mostly obtained through models. And also star clusters are considered one of the templates, to approximation at least, one of the templates of simple stellar population that can be combined to build more complex ones, like spectra, color magnitude diagrams, integrated light, to study more complex stellar aggregates, such as external galaxies. And finally, star clusters are the ideal tracers of the evolution, structure, and dynamics and formation of the galaxies that host them. Okay, so they are dynamical test particles, standard candles to a certain extent for distant galaxies, and so on. But there are two elephants in the room. So our tool is somewhat broken, or at least it would be more correct to say that our tool is not adequate anymore to the quality of the data that we have in hand now. Okay, and the two big elephants in the room, they also have names that I will tell you later, are the fact that we do not know exactly how they form, and we cannot fully explain their stellar content. So the names of the two elephants are multiple populations and non-canonical populations, or you could call them also exotic stellar populations, as some people do. So I will say more about this, but just to give you the feeling for it, these are very old open problems Multiple populations were discovered in the late 70s. They are, I will describe more a bit later, but light element variations among the stars of clusters that should be twins in reality. And the chemistry is broadly compatible with hot hydrogen burning chemistry. And we made the hypothesis that this can happen because globular clusters, and only globular clusters, have multiple stellar generations. And this would mean, unfortunately, those scenarios don't work fully. So the result is that we do not even know if star formation in clusters at high redshift, like globular clusters, and low redshift, like the open clusters in the Milky Way and in nearby galaxies, proceeds in the same way or in very different ways. And that's quite a big of a question mark. And then the second problem is these non-canonical populations. The first population, blue stragglers, were discovered in 1953. Most of these non-canonical or exotic populations are thought to be byproducts of binary stellar evolutions. Some of them rotate fast. And they are seen not only in globular clusters, but also in open clusters and sometimes in the field population of the Milky Way and in other galaxies. And not all of them are completely understood. So we don't know how this happens. And what is the problem of not knowing this? Is that if we calibrate our models and our age scale on clusters, but we do not know and we cannot predict how many stars are non-single and non-normal, we may make mistakes in the age determinations and in the age scale. And this can bring to, uncertainties in our stellar clocks of up to 20% when we use clusters to study external galaxies, which is a lot. Now, let me go a bit more into the details. So the multiple population phenomenon, when it was discovered, it was called anticorrelations, or chemical anomalies as well, because it was discovered first through the chemistry. So what you see here, I will try to use my pointer, tell me if you see it. Yeah. So you see the three most famous anticorrelation planes: carbon, nitrogen, sodium, oxygen, and magnesium, aluminum. And here in these planes, you do see what are considered the normal stars with a chemistry that is similar to the one of the Milky Way halo. They should be all in these circles, but many of the stars, now what you see in this plot is more than one cluster in the same plot, just to show you the variety that one can have. There is a large fraction of the stars, actually more than 50% and sometimes up to 70% or more, of the stars which have an anomalous chemistry, which is not compatible with the normal halo of the Milky Way. Now, it was recognized already in the 80s, I would say, that at least qualitatively speaking, these chemical patterns are compatible with hot CNO burning, which means burning is a wrong word, but say transforming through nuclear reactions hydrogen into helium, using these elements as catalysts. And so when a reaction is slower, one element accumulates. And when it is faster, one element is destroyed. And so you have these anticorrelations that manifest when you observe the stars. So qualitatively speaking, every star capable of burning hydrogen through the CNO cycle and the neon, sodium, and magnesium, aluminum cycles are good origins of this chemistry. In a few clusters, but I don't want to complicate the picture too much today, you also see heavy elements variation, iron, S-process elements, heavier species. But this is another mystery that I will not talk about today. At least not yet. Maybe next talk in 1 year or so. Then when the discovery, actually, I wanted to put something from my PhD thesis, which is this plot here. I mean, we started around year 2000. The discovery was by these guys, Lee et al., 1999. There were multiple photometric sequences in the color magnitude diagrams. Now, this one is ground-based photometry. You see how beautiful is this one obtained with HST. How many details you can see. 3 main sequences separated from each other. And so this is when the name changed from anticorrelations into multiple populations. Because with photometry, with one exposure of 20 minutes, you get virtually all of the stars in the cluster. With spectroscopy, you have to go one by one, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. So here it's much more efficient. And why is this happening? It is happening because if you look at this plot down here, basically photometry is nothing else than very low resolution spectroscopy. So basically, if you take a synthetic spectrum of a normal star, the one in black, and the synthetic spectrum of a strange star, chemically anomalous star, you see that some photometric bands intersect molecular bands that change the colors and the magnitudes of the stars. So in the end, you can define the diagrams of color combinations, which maximize these differences, which are called chromosome maps, where you can very efficiently classify multiple populations in different groups in real clusters, much more efficiently than with spectroscopy. Okay, so this is the observational setup and the definition. What did people do with this observational setup? Well, first we rested our interpretation in two main pillars. The first pillar is that we see the abundance variations in all phases. So main sequence, subgiant branch, red giant branch, asymptotic giant branch, and horizontal branch. So everywhere you look in globular clusters, you see these anomalies. And the second is that you even see these anomalies in stars which are not able to produce that chemistry. So they are not able to activate the CNO cycle. For example, main sequence stars showing the magnesium aluminum anticorrelation, they do not have hydrogen burning hot enough to activate these cycles. So considering these two things, well, considering much more than that, but I'm trying to simplify this and to make it digestible in a way, it means that the chemistry must come from outside of the stars. And if you see it in all phases, it means that the chemistry must be able to survive all of the structural changes and mixing episodes that happen throughout the evolution of the stars. So it means that either a large fraction of the star is polluted, so not just a thin layer on the surface that can be destroyed, or the star has been born from polluted gas that was produced by something else. So these are the pillars of our current interpretation. And what is our current interpretation? It is generational scenarios. By the way, I realized that I put here a plot that has nothing to do with generational scenarios. So please consider that this plot here is not present, okay? It's not a generational scenario. Now, generational scenarios work like this. A first generations of star with normal chemistry are somehow able to activate hot CNO burning and to bring the byproducts of that burning into the intracluster medium. In the intracluster medium, the gas remains long enough to cool down and form new stars, but not too long because it doesn't have to be blown away by stellar winds, supernova explosions, and all the rest. So it's between the sea and the sand, okay? It's a really nice tight spot where this can happen. These scenarios, however, the more we studied them, super happy that they could explain what we saw, they started to reveal weaknesses. And there are these two beautiful reviews that are listed here, where this is discussed in detail. I will mention here only three problems that I sort of fixed my attention upon. I don't know why, but to me, they are really something that I cannot figure out. So I think they're really important. The first one is the mass budget problem. So the normal stars are fewer in general than the anomalous stars. So how can they create from their ejecta a larger generation of stars? This is called the mass budget problem. You would require too much mass. So, but to reproduce the chemistry, you need to mix those ejecta with a pristine gas. And therefore, you can increase the mass by accreting pristine gas. But this brings another problem, which is the gas dilution problem. Where does the gas come from? It is really a lot. You need a lot of gas. So where does it come from? How can it be accreted by such a small entity like a globular cluster? And finally, how can the supposedly weak potential well of the cluster retain that gas long enough to form stars? Now, what happens now in the community is the following. Some people are trying to understand, solve, and alleviate these problems. Michela's group is doing a little bit of this, but people who do simulations mostly, they try to figure out if this is possible or not, how to solve the problems. Another part of the community is launching ideas, sometimes super crazy ideas that just don't survive, or just one paper comes out and then is forgotten. So people try to be creative. And I'm in the second group now. I was in the first before. And so one of the things that we're figuring is, how can it be that these chemical anomalies can only be observed in globular clusters? So a large part of the community, including myself at some point, we try to understand the boundaries of the phenomenon. Here you see a plot of mass versus age of star clusters. And people went and measured the anomalies and see where they appear and when they disappear. And it looks like at an age of 2 gigayears, it's the youngest age where you can see some anomalies. And the mass of 10 to the 4 solar masses for the cluster is the minimum mass to be able to see these anomalies. Okay, so it looks like there is a quick boundary. So initially, you could only see these in globular clusters. Then people started looking in globular clusters in the local group, and every globular cluster they studied showed the anomalies. Then at some point, thanks to the advent of large spectroscopic surveys, people found a large fraction of the stars in the field with anomalous chemistry. And so they started wondering, are these escaped from globular clusters? But for example, in the halo, they would be compatible with it. But in the inner galaxy, especially the bulge region, there are so many of these anomalous stars that they are not compatible with the globular clusters that you see there. So there are many, many more than expected. And finally, the fact that people were able to go in the Magellanic Clouds, where you have massive clusters with intermediate age, show that even intermediate clusters between open and globular clusters could show the anomalies, right? So it looks like the environment somehow matters, right? But there is not net boundary. You can see these stars more and more. The more you observe, the more you see them everywhere. Now, for the second elephant in the room, which is non-canonical stellar populations, I will repeat this concept that star clusters are or can be dynamically active environments in which stellar interactions are favored. And in fact, there is a variety of stars that cannot be explained. Actually, I forgot writing. Oh, no, it's there. This is M67, one of the most studied open clusters. It's made of solar twins, basically. And what you see here is a nice image made by Emily Leiner, who is the discoverer of one of the anomalous populations, by the way, during her PhD thesis, showing that if you have a look at this one here should be the canonical sequence, right? This is the binary, unresolved binary sequence. There is a hint of some confusion here with blue stragglers coming up, a sequence of yellow stragglers here and here. Subgiants. Now I can read a list of the types of exotic populations and you will be drunk by the end of it. So we have blue, red, and yellow stragglers. We have subgiants, lithium-rich stars, extended main sequence turn-offs. We have split main sequences, hot subdwarfs, extreme horizontal branch stars, overmassive and undermassive stars, and I forgot blue lurkers there. So you see, it's often called in papers, in real scientific papers, a zoo or a jungle of exotic stellar populations. So to try and put some order in this, I will divide them in 3 groups. I will try at least because it is not always obvious. But the first group is stars that have more mass than they should. So stars that have acquired mass during their evolution. And the prototype of this class of stars are blue stragglers. If some of you have heard about them, these are stars that appear in clusters. They are brighter and bluer than the main sequence turn-off. Initially, in 53, when they were discovered by Sandage, people thought, okay, then globular clusters really have young stars in them. But then later it was discovered that no, they are probably byproducts of stellar interaction where one of the stars either acquired mass or there was a collision with a merger, which is not improbable in globular clusters especially. But they are seen in globular clusters, open clusters, and in the field. So they are everywhere. There is also one blue straggler that was discovered. It was discovered that it was a triple system with an inner binary and an outer star. And this could maybe help. And the blue lurkers that I forgot before, They are simply blue stragglers that are hiding in the main sequence. And the only way to find them is when they have just formed and they are spinning like crazy compared to the other stars in the main sequence. But there are also other types of mass, of stars that acquired mass that were found with Kepler. This is one of the papers where these stars are found, but there are more. And you see the color magnitude diagram. To the non-experts, you don't know what you're looking at. This is magnitude, this is color, this is the red clump, which is the sequence of stars burning helium. And all of the upward triangles are overmassive and all of the downward ones are undermassive. Okay, so these stars do not have the mass that they should have for that age of that stellar population. And so the only other explanation is that they acquired the mass somehow. And in this paper, but there are other estimates like this, it was estimated that 10% of the stars in this specific cluster must have undergone mass transfer, which is a lot. It's a lot, right? Because then there will be normal binaries which don't interact, and they will be perhaps many more. And in some clusters and in some cases, this percentage goes up to 20%. There was a Nature letter estimating this number, 20%. The second category is, unsurprisingly, stars with less mass. So stars that somehow have lost part of their mass. And there are these two classes, which are the prototypes that I can mention. The first is red stragglers and sub-subgiants, which are stars which are redder and fainter than the red giant branch and the subgiant branch. Normally, when a star loses mass, it expands a little bit, goes on that side of the cooler stars. And in globular clusters, there are also some red stragglers and sub-subgiants, but there are also these sequences of stars that I also shown you earlier, which could be compatible with this. And in globular clusters, these sequences or these populations, fainter and redder, they contain low mass X-ray binaries, cataclysmic variables. Some even have hot companions like white dwarfs and so on. So, and the other category, and an interesting fact about these is that in globular clusters, people think that there are two channels to form these, let's say, in globular clusters and in open clusters, they are in the same numbers. So if they're a byproduct of dynamical evolution, you should have many more in globular clusters. So we didn't fully complete the link between the two populations. And then hot subdwarfs and extreme horizontal branch stars are stars burning helium in the core and which appear hotter than what they should be because they have been peeled off of the external layers. And the internal core is more and more exposed, increasing the temperature. In the field, they are all binaries. In star clusters, they are not. Why is that? Nobody knows. Is it because we have still biases in the detection of binaries, or is it because short period binaries, as it seems from other indications, are destroyed in globular clusters, either by merging or by other mechanisms? We don't know. And the third group is stars which rotate fast. So stars which rotate fast, here I show two examples. This is a cluster with an extended main sequence turn-off. So these are the normal stars. They spin normally, let's say, with low spinning velocities. But then you have a group of stars here on the right, which are redder and fainter because of gravity darkening, for those of you who know gravity darkening, and they're spinning very fast. And there are also clusters younger, in this case, a few million years, where you do see a split main sequence. One main sequence rotates fast and the other one doesn't, or vice versa, sorry. One doesn't rotate and the other rotates fast. So all of the populations listed there, I won't read them again because it makes this a zoo effect, but many of these populations, they show a bimodality in the projected rotational velocity. And this goes from the pre-main sequence up to the top of the main sequence, right? So it's really, really another problem that we don't know exactly how this happens. Different communities explain it with different mechanisms. So we don't know yet. Now, hope I'm not going too slowly. Okay, that's fine. So now this is a plot which is quite complicated. I would like you to bring home just one concept from this plot. So I told you that multiple populations in globular clusters were found down to an age of 2 gigayears. Now these clusters, these are 5 clusters, Pleiades, Ursa Major, and so on, which have ages below 1 gigayear, below 2 gigayears, sorry. And these, the gray stars in the background are globular cluster stars. So you see the full chemical spread that globular cluster stars display. The red circle, which is different from the one that I showed you before, is now the position of solar type stars. So all of the stars in the open clusters, they have solar chemical composition, except from the ones plotted here in color, which are stars close to the main sequence turn-off, which spin fast. They are spectral types A, F, and in some cases, they show a chemistry which is really similar, like in this case here or here, which is really similar to what you see in globular clusters, right? And for these stars, we don't know exactly why they show this chemistry. But one important thing is that if in the same clusters, you observe the stars lower, in the lower part of the main sequence or in the red giant branch, you do not see such a strange chemistry. All of the stars are within this circle. They are normal. And so you can imagine a scenario where this chemistry is just in a thin layer on top of the star. And when the star evolves or where it is not spinning, this chemistry is not visible. So apart from all of the complications and interesting avenues opened by such a result, which was actually confirmed in another cluster in the Large Magellanic Cloud, what is important here is that this chemistry, the strange chemistry, can be transient. It's not necessarily permanent. And if you start thinking along that direction, and you go back to the pillars of the paradigm that we have been using to describe these populations, you can relax one constraint. So if the chemistry is not permanent, you can start looking for different types of mechanisms that don't act just when the cluster was formed, but that can act throughout the life of the cluster in different phases, in different ways. And maybe some stars remain polluted for a long time. Some other stars, they just go back to normal at some point, depending on what is the mechanism that caused it. And here I come to the hypothesis that connects the two populations. So the chemistry of multiple populations can be produced by all types of binaries which expose somehow the products of hot and hot burning, whatever they are. So you can have a Roche-Lobe overflow, more or less stable, more or less efficient. You can have wind focusing if the stars are a little bit more separated. You can have common envelope in the most exaggerated cases of mass transfer and so on. And this opens up a whole zoo of things as is required by the observations, where you can be observing a star that is a stripped donor in a binary system, exposing, for example, a hydrogen burning shell. Or you can be observing a star that has been polluted by one of the polluters that were employed in generational scenarios. And you can have a star that is polluted entirely. For example, imagine a fully convective star that didn't reach the main sequence yet. Is polluted by a companion that is fully polluted because everything is mixed instantaneously. Or you can have a star like the ones that we observed in open clusters where only a little thin surface layer is polluted, and then this will disappear with time. So you have to fold in somehow all of the possible and reasonably possible types of binaries in the cluster and understand which ones are capable to create this chemistry. So this is the hypothesis that received the funding from the ERC European Research Council, and that I will be testing with a big group of people that I will show you later in the coming years. Okay, so what are the advantages? How could this help? Now I'm focusing on the same 3 problems that I mentioned before. So the mass budget problem, the gas dilution problem, and the gas retention problem. Right, for the mass budget, if some of the stars are only polluted on the surface, you need less mass in total to create that population. So you alleviate the mass budget problem. For the gas dilution, the envelopes of the stars that are polluted act as a large reservoir of pristine gas that can be mixed with a polluting gas from a donor, for example. And for the gas retention problem, you don't need to take into account the potential well of the entire cluster. You just can focus on the potential well of each single binary. So these three problems would be alleviated. Of course, there are many more problems that we have to test and see if things turn out to be working good. And another interesting aspect is that you can use all of the polluters that have been already extensively studied for the generational scenarios. So the two most famous ones are fast rotating massive stars and massive AGB stars. They can be members of a binary system which produce that chemistry, but instead of releasing it within the intracluster medium, they release it onto a companion. But more than this, we can use more polluters. For example, imagine a 1.5 solar mass red giant branch star, which is burning hydrogen in a shell. It would never be useful in a generational scenario because there is no way that that chemistry exits the star and enters the intracluster medium. But if you have a binary system, you could peel off the star until you reach portions close to the hydrogen burning envelope. And in that case, you could expose that chemistry. And you could even transfer it to a companion if the conditions are favorable. So we can use all of the polluters of generational scenarios and more. Additionally, rotation is our friend, our ally, because it's a very good detector of recent binary interactions, let's say. And also, if a star, for some reason, is rotating fast from its pre-main sequence, the internal stratification of the chemical element will be altered and will provide more variety, as is observed. So the idea is promising, it could work, we need to test it. So, and it is testable. So basically what we need to do is to connect multiple populations with the binary star populations, or let's say the putative binary star populations that give rise to the exotic populations. So we have both a place where you can test it by observing stars in exotic populations and getting their chemistry, observing types of binaries that we know are able to test their chemistry and see if we can detect them in multiple populations. And the tool that we will use to connect these two populations is the chemistry. So why has not been done before? Because obtaining the chemistry of binary stars is a complex business. It requires a lot of time, effort, manpower. And so only a grant such as this one enables us to do that. Okay, we could only do that if not with a grant like this in a survey, well-financed and funded survey. And the idea is to first test the viability of the hypothesis. If it works, we find all of the possible ways in which this chemistry could be put in place. Then we explore which one of these are most probable. So we just don't find the first solution, then we're satisfied. We explore all of the solutions, all of the indicators. And then if this works out, then we pave the way for people who do this professionally. We are not experts, we are observers, to start building self-consistent full chemical models, chemical, dynamical, hydrodynamical, stellar evolution models of how star clusters form. And if the hypothesis does not turn out to be viable, which is entirely possible, and we have to keep our mind free and able to accept that it doesn't work if it doesn't, we still will be able to build a large database, because if you want to understand how it works and in different environments like field stars, open cluster stars, globular cluster stars, you do need the different indicators, photometry, spectroscopy, abundances, binary characterization, and you would need at least, let's say, I don't know, 100 stars in each of the environment, maybe 100 different clusters, or maybe 1,000 stars in 10 different clusters, whatever. But a large database, I imagine something like 10 to the 5 stars analyzed as homogeneously as possible. So this database is, I believe, will be, let's say, valuable also for people who don't care about multiple populations, people who care about knowing binary fractions, people who care about knowing the chemistry of binaries to model them more accurately, people who care simply about having a sample of strange stars to compare with their results to understand what they're finding, and so on and so forth. And we will use survey data, archival data, and when necessary to zoom in on potentially interesting objects, also our own new proprietary data. We will probably need to either build new software for the chemical abundances of distorted stars, fast rotating, so flattened, or pear-shaped because they are passing mass, or help other people who are building these tools to extend them in all mass regimes, including low mass stars, because there are tools for high mass stars. And finally, and that's the key point, so not only different environments, not only different types of stars analyzed as homogeneously as possible, with the chemistry included, but also simulations of stellar evolution, binary evolution, to test and interpret what we find, but also to guide the observations. Otherwise, we will be lost in a sea of observables, which is really huge and multidimensional. Now, that's it for the moment. The project has just started. After a few months of suffering, I have assembled a team of people I like a lot so far, with some surprises and so on. We will work on this. And so please wish us good luck. If you're interested in this topic, consider that what we really care about doing is to provide a public database that is useful to as many cases as possible. So please contact us, collaborate with us, ask us questions, whatever you think is useful to maximize the scientific return of such a study. Or you can simply wait on the river for our results to pass and see if you find anything useful for yourself. So with this, I conclude, and I thank you for your attention, and I hope that many of you would like to collaborate with us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. We have quite some time for questions, so let's take the opportunity today. Online, please also, if you would type any questions as in the chat, or put your hand up, please. Any student questions first? Yep.
Hi, thanks a lot for this amazing talk about clusters. I learned a lot. Not exactly my area. I have a question about the StarDance hypothesis. Would this be like valid in a specific age or age range of clusters, or like depending on the age, like different dances would happen for different actors playing a role?
The fact is we don't know. So we can make hypotheses based on first principle of stellar evolution and chemistry, but this is a very complex problem. So I think it is best to explore the whole space of parameters, ages, metallicities, masses of the clusters, properties of the binary stars, like mass ratio separation, the type of interaction. And so, and then discover a posteriori if there is any such relation, if there is an age range which dominates. We actually don't know yet. I expect that it wouldn't be the case, or let's say not in a very tight way, but we don't know. I don't know at least.
Okay. If I may, I was really fascinating, this nature versus nurture aspect to the problem. You seem to have a very interesting path to quantify and model these anonymous abundances in stars, which goes from the process of binary systems. Where does that leave the sort of possibility of inferring something about the formation of the clusters, whether this happened in one or two bursts, and what sort of feedback was going on in that epoch? You seem to be concentrating on stuff going on afterwards, but is there any hope left?
So I can tell you the hope that I envisage now. which will probably change when we find something strange. If we find, but I believe we will find something strange because it's to a certain extent uncharted territory. But imagine a situation in which, okay, in this hypothesis, there are no age differences between the populations. There is only one population, and everything you see is caused by the structural and chemical changes on the stars that interact with each other. So if we manage to prove that the hypothesis is at least partially correct, that will already give an answer on the age spread.
Right.
And will solve the problem of, the strangeness of having star formation proceeding in very different ways at high and low redshift. But imagine that we quantify a certain set of properties for these stars, which is, I hope, more stringent than what has been done so far, because very few teams had the focus, the desire, and the resources to do that in a sort of systematic way. With these hopefully more stringent constraints, people who model these things, they will be able to cut away large parts of the parameter space. And this will help also in trying to understand how clusters form in general, because you could only consider those models that lead to the hopefully more stringent constraints that we are going to provide for binary stars, but also for multiple populations. And also having different environments like globular clusters, massive, old, metal poor, open clusters, less massive, younger, metal rich, large Magellanic Cloud clusters, intermediate age and massive, and the field population. That would also provide stringent constraints to observe all of these environments, which traditionally are explored by different communities. So they don't often, not always at least, talk to each other. So that's the idea.
But basically you are going to cut through some of the, noise in this problem of initial conditions through this sort of
More
analysis.
than noise, I would talk about an observational.
Sorry, not noise.
No, I understand why you said
Yeah.
noise, but I'm thinking more along the lines of we will try to break the barriers that traditionally stand between different fields of research as much as we can with the resources we have, so that we can obtain a comprehensive and self-consistent scenario. Online question.
Yep. I'll just read the question for the benefit of everybody here. Question, this is from Johanna Müller-Horn. Would the binary pollution channel you suggest to explain multiple populations require a high binary fraction? I am asking because clusters like 47 TOC and Omega Sen show multiple populations but have very low observed binary fractions.
Yes, absolutely. This is one of the typical concerns. Normally, star clusters, they don't show very large binary fractions, but the way in which binary fractions are determined in star clusters is still biased because it's a very difficult, time-consuming, multi-technique endeavor to determine the binary population in star clusters. So there are missing populations, and also the low binary fractions that we observe in star cluster, relatively low, let's say 10, 20%, they are not compatible with the large fraction of stars that have undergone mass transfer. So you would have a small number of binaries which don't interact and a large number which interact. So, and we are trying to see what happens, to test. We need to test to understand.
Okay. Was that answering your question, Johanna? Just give us an indication and then we'll come back to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Another question from the floor here before we go back online.
Yeah, I have a question that is kind of a follow-up of the question by Johanna. And in the meantime, thank you so much for the talk, really inspiring. The point is, indeed, binary stars in stellar clusters, especially globular clusters, have a hard life. They are broken, they are perturbed. So I'm wondering whether these signatures, or at least some of them, could be explained with collisions of binaries and violent interactions rather than the traditional picture of mass transfer in a quiet binary. Do you have plans to disentangle this degeneracy?
We do not have clear plans because, to be honest, how can I say, the classical view is that if you have a stellar collision, the chemistry of the star doesn't change much. Exactly. Let's talk about this. So we need to first to explore how collisions alter the chemistry, and also higher multiplicity systems should be considered, and also unstable situations like flybys, interactions with, I don't know, compact objects which strip the stars. So there is a whole zoo of effects that we should consider. The reason why I have to say, I'm not an expert of binary interactions yet. I'm becoming slowly and painfully one, but I'm not yet. So initially, the first thing I thought is if you want to alter the chemistry, you need to transfer mass somehow. But this is not necessarily true. So we must keep our eyes and ears completely open and see what happens in the literature, at conferences, learn, test. I think it's the only way. I have no prejudice.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw, oh yeah, another question from the floor.
Yeah, thanks a lot. At first glance, it seems a bit surprising that you see so many bimodalities and sharp split sequences. One would naively expect that if you have binaries, they have a broad distribution of parameters like mass ratios, semi-major axes. So that would seem to imply a broad range of possible evolutionary outcomes. Also, if you have rapidly rotating stars, gravity darkening makes their properties dependent on the inclination of the rotation axis. And again, spreading out this population of stars with different inclinations in color and magnitude. So do you have a comment on why, generically, why you see split and not broadened sequences?
So there are no explanations why, as far as I know. It surprises everyone because if you have a V sin I kind of orientation, that spreads, as you said, the rotational velocity, I mean, the projected rotational velocities you measure, but nevertheless, you can reverse engineer, like take different distributions, convolve them with a V sin I, random V sin I, and you get what you observe. So the bimodality is there. And in some cases, even with the convolution with the V sin I, you do see the bimodality is so striking that people even wondered if the spin axes are aligned in some clusters among the stars, okay? The reason why there is a bimodality almost everywhere, nobody knows, we don't know, but there are interesting theories that are worth testing. For example, as I mentioned, different communities have different explanations along the main sequence. So the guys doing pre-main sequence stars, normal main sequence, extended main sequence turn-offs, blue stragglers, and so on. But one explanation I like particularly is that when stars are born, they have a disk, an accretion disk around them. If they are in binary systems, the companion may destroy the disk, and therefore disk locking, which is one of the mechanisms which slows down the spin of the stars much faster than normally, that fails. So half of the stars are in binaries. This would mean 50-50. And they have a different angular momentum evolution that apparently surfaces back over and over, depending on the properties of the star. This is the one I like the most so far, but I'm still learning. I'm personally, not the entire community. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they have better answers. I need to understand. But we need to test these things somehow by connecting, as I mentioned before, breaking barriers between communities and trying to connect the behavior all across the main sequence. The pre-main sequence star guys, they should talk with the high mass guys, they should talk with the red giants guys, with the globular cluster guys, and so on. And we will try to make meetings to put them all in a room and let them fight until we learn something new. So with the funds, you can do that. You can really invite people to such meetings, and that's what I plan to do. Maybe you are one of the people I should invite, I don't know. That's I would like to know. Who are the experts?
Okay, thank you. If I may just ask a question related to that topic. This idea of debris disks around stars, is there enough debris to make an observable difference to the spectra? I mean, I'm talking about falling back onto the surface of stars. I mean, is that also something? I mean,
I don't know.
I mean,
I need to think
I
about
could
it.
be ignorant. I'm just silly. You just because you
Yeah.
mentioned debris disks.
Yeah, brainstorming ideas. Yeah. Well, there are also for some of these populations, like the lithium-rich stars, is planet engulfment is one of the things that people consider. We don't know.
All right.
I don't know how to test it. I need to think about it.
Okay. Moving on to some experts. We got Hans Ludwig, who is online, and he raised his hands. Do you have a question, Hans? I'll just put the loudspeaker on here. Do you hear me, Hans Ludwig? I don't think so. All right, we'll
Of these populations. Thank you.
okay. There was nothing, I think. If you have a question, Hans Ludwig, can you type it?
Okay. I don't know whether you can understand me. The question was already posed by Andreas about the discrete nature that one often sees in these multiple population, not a broadening. So this is set. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's the comment. Do you want to say
I'm not
say
sure
something?
if I understood. You talked about the discreteness of the populations.
Okay, it was the same question as Andreas. Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm just wait a minute. Turn this mic off here. That's it. Okay. So I think we're just approaching the time to wrap up. If there are no more questions here or online, then we have one from Keys.
I like the name Blue Lurkers very much. I was just wondering if they are lurking in the main sequence, then why are they so blue? I mean, they are then not really in the blue part of the HR diagram, right?
So you mean if they are in a canonical sequence, why are they so special?
Where are they in the HR? Maybe that I didn't really understand. They are lurking somewhere.
Because I didn't say it. I thought you were already floated with too much information, but the idea is that they're called blue lurkers precisely because they are in a normal sequence, and therefore they are here. So they are they were detected because compared to the other stars in this sequence, they spin a lot. So imagine that normal stars here are no more than 30 kilometers, the Sinai, and the blue lurkers are 100 or more, which for a high mass star perspective is not much, but is completely off the normal behavior of main sequence stars. And they are normally relatively low mass stars. So we're talking about, let's say blue stragglers are more massive than the turn-off, which is the mass set by the age of the cluster, let's say the last mass on the main sequence. And but there are blue stragglers down here made of lower mass stars which accreted mass. And there is no way of distinguishing them, except for the very few who just interacted recently, so less than 1 giga-year ago, or even less, depending on the mass. Because after the interaction, they are spun up, so you can measure them. And then they slowly go back to unspinning state. Because being low mass stars, magnetic braking and other mechanisms are efficient in spinning them down. So there are very few of them known. No, they are called blue because they are blue stragglers that are hiding into the main sequence. So that's but they're not blue, they are normal. I told you it's a zoo. They are stragglers, but they're not even stragglers because they are in a sequence. So they are lower mass blue stragglers, but that's not as exciting as blue lurker, of course.
Okay. On that note, we'll just gradually draw to a conclusion. You're going to need quite a lot of vocabulary for all this very interesting new phenomenon that you're bringing to
Sorry,
light in this.
yeah.
Before we thank you, Elena, for this wonderful colloquium, could we just have
Yes.
the announcements
So it should be here somewhere.
on your
Here.
laptop? It would,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
yes. So, as usual, we announce next week's colloquium, and I suppose this is of, I don't know whether that's relevant to this topic. I mean, if you go towards the longer wavelengths, you might be able to see more clusters in the middle Milky Way. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out next week, but we have Daisuke Kawata is going to tell us about next steps in astronometry missions, and in particular the Jasmine mission. And last slide is events. Now, as always, we give an opportunity for students and young postdocs to speak to the speaker directly following the colloquium. So please join us here at the front if you want to continue to chat on any topic, even non-astrophysical topics with Elena. And later, dinner will be at 7:30 at Essig House. So again, if you're interested in joining, please just announce yourself at the front here. Well, with that, I think we'd all very much like to thank you again for this very, yep. Oh. All right. Okay, so people online that didn't catch that, that's the Hemingway pub. We'll be meeting in maybe quarter of an hour, half an hour from now. And please come to the front if you want to join. All right, so now it really is. Let's thank Elena for that really informative, very interesting overview. Thank you very much.